Hey everybody, I'm super excited to have the co-founder and CEO of one of the companies that I've admired from a distance for many years, Klaviyo, and Andrew Bialecki's here. Now crazy, a $9.5 billion, I wrote this up, a $9.5 billion leader in email and multi-channel marketing for e-commerce and more, right? Is that a fair summary? Crazy.
Yeah, we still have a long. Well, thanks for having us. We still have a long way to go, but yes, I think we definitely feel like we're further along than we were a few years ago. Yeah, we're getting somewhere.
So what's fun for me, we'll dig in here for folks that I'm interested in personally one piece of e-commerce, which is the B2B side, and if you're not in it, you will find Klaviyo fascinating, like the scale and what it's learned. If you are in it, what's interesting is Klaviyo is one of these hero companies, and the B2B in e-commerce is huge, but it is a vertical, which we'll dig into. And I invested early in Algolia, which is a search API, which became very e-commerce focused. And I was the first real investor in a company called Gorgeous, also on Shopify that Andrew knows. And granted, I wasn't a merchant back in the day, but you would see a few years ago, Klaviyo starting to be a de facto choice, which we'll talk about, right? You go from the upstart to kind of a leader, and it's a very interesting transition point. And I think everyone that's now especially in the Shopify ecosystem, looks to learn and steal and borrow and emulate a lot of the Klaviyo playbook. So it's going to be pretty funny to dig into it. But first, before we get there, I'm sorry, and I'm embarrassed to say this, but what is a Klaviyo? Just so I know. What does the title mean? Okay. What's the name of the company?
What is a Klaviyo? Okay, so
what is a Klaviyo?
Yeah, so when we started, Ed and I, my co-founder, we wanted to pick a name for our company that we felt like would be durable and agnostic enough, general enough that we want to get kind of lumped in with, you see companies that are either about about marketing specifically or email or sales, and we were like, yep. What we want to build is something more abstract than that. So the name Klaviyo comes from the word clavia, which in Spanish is a pin or a mountaineering spike. So we like this idea of if you want to climb a mountain, you need kind of the right tools to do it. And so that's what we want Klaviyo to be, is like tools to get hard things done.
So maybe the Amazon of marketing.
Yeah, or hopefully much more than just marketing. We think about it's like, hey, how do we just help more businesses be successful independently? So in that case, maybe a little bit of the anti-Amazon in there.
All right, so let's get into the footprint in a bit. Let's just spend a little bit of time in the early days so we can understand the company today. So not an overnight success story, right? Founded in 2012. What was the original idea, and what was the 10x feature? Like the one thing that clicked where the product became sellable. Like what was your special 10x feature when you were feature poor?
Yeah. So when we started in 2012, it's interesting. Everybody knows us for kind of marketing and messaging, but we actually started the first year. All we did was we built a database. So our kind of view on the world was we wanted to make it possible that rather than have to talk to customers yourself, synchronously, you could basically take the way you want to treat people and program it into software. So we felt like there was this mismatch, especially we talked about in commerce and retail, in consumer businesses where you have to choose, do I either help all of my customers and aim for scale, or do I aim for giving a really great, super personalized experience to my VIPs?
Yep.
And it was obviously you want to do both, but it was like, well, how am I ever going to do both? Do I just have to hire, thousands of people? What's the model? And because you think about let's say the LTVs, the annual spend is so low in consumer, right? Relatively, you can't afford to build out big teams to do it. You need something in between. So we actually started out, we had this idea that what was missing was kind of the right way to store data. So you could, you think about when you and I are talking, we answer questions in real time, but there was no database that was good at kind of analytical queries, but also really low latency, a few milliseconds. So we spent actually the first year just building that. And so if you talk to our early customers, they're like, oh yeah, we got Klaviyo because they basically had an API or a UI that would allow us to just run queries against our customers. And then they export it out. And what's funny was I remember walking around outside, doing some customer calls, checking in with folks. This was back in late 2012. And all of our customers were like, hey, so would you ever think about integrating with ExactTarget or, Constant Contact or MailChimp? And I remember asking them, I'm like, well, how much do you love those pieces of software?
Yeah.
And they were like, well, I don't know. We don't have any special affinity for it. It's actually kind of hard to do, the more complex, more personalized stuff that you guys are enabling. I said, okay, crazy idea. What if we just built, those, kind of marketing, messaging, email first, now SMS tools. And like, oh yeah, sure, go for it. And I remember calling my co-founder after a couple of these calls and saying, I have a crazy idea. How about we just build both the database and the marketing messaging tools? We'll combine it into one platform, and like that will be our product. And I think that was, when we started to do that, because I mean, earlier we were fortunate that we, at the time, like SendGrid, now Twilio like existed, so we didn't have to solve all the same problems that a lot of folks earlier had to solve. We almost instantly saw folks that would come to us and say, I have this idea for, some personalized, messaging or marketing I want to do. And all of a sudden they were like, boy, because of the database you built and because of the, the fact that I can then design messages and send them programmatically, you've kind of solved all this. And like, I don't have to build anything anymore. And we actually started in SaaS. So I mean, just like every other, I don't know, probably entrepreneur, developer, like I want to sell, to other SaaS companies. And so we started down that path. I just got lucky that a buddy of mine had a Shopify store actually. And, he said, hey, can I try this out? And we said, yeah, let's go for it. And it turned out actually that was an even bigger market, or let's put it this way, the use cases were even better defined. So
Yes.
it was really easy to get into, like all of a sudden we realized we're solving for his one store, and there were thousands of other people that had more or less the same kinds of issues and same use cases. And so we could go really fast.
So that's interesting. So you certainly didn't start, well, I guess, did you start with an e-commerce perspective as a database API, or did you figure this out when you got brought into a Shopify store?
I mean, the big unlock for us was when we were working with other software companies like us. One of the things we realized was because they had so many different functions, it was actually, our technology was fine. The hard part was kind of teaching people how to map, the way they wanted to treat customers, help figure that out. I mean, in some sense, if you think about in the SaaS world, defining what customer success is, they didn't really have a customer success playbook. They were figuring it out as they went along. In e-commerce, everybody knew kind of the standard playbook.
Yes.
And so they were just more about like, hey, how do I scale it? How do I automate it? How do I make it more, personal, contextualized?
So it sounds like, at first blush, building a very sophisticated, robust database and then adding email seems like too much work, right? But it sounds like at the end, and I should know this is the secret sauce for Klaviyo, because starting perhaps as from a technology center as a database, that's very different than most email or SMS companies. They're starting off as a basic, easy to use product, but without that incredible core, right? And that may be the special sauce, because personalization is hard.
Yeah, that was basically, that was our big bet was, and I remember talking with our team about this. We said, hey, we think we can add, messaging and some of the marketing primitives on top of our database faster than all of the existing, say, marketing tech companies that just did, marketing stuff, faster than they could figure out how to build or integrate with somebody kind of the data parts. And we think that proved, I mean, yes, so we're big believers, in that case, this was very much a both and. So one of the things I tell, entrepreneurs all the time is you have to be a little careful. I know people aim for MVPs, but sometimes you cut off parts that are really important. In our case, having that kind of clarity of like, okay, it has to be both of these two things together. And then just setting it up where, I mean, for a long time, our product teams, our engineering teams thought that way. We had teams that were just focused on building database tech, and that was awesome.
Yes.
Other teams that were just focused on building marketing, messaging, and creative tech, and that was awesome. And the coolest part was when you combine the two together, and everybody knew that. And so it was exciting because you almost had these like two companies working together to build kind of something that was going to be greater than the pieces.
And I probably should know this, but when you talked about SendGrid and Twilio, when you first bolted email on, were you using third-party APIs for email? Or did you have to build it all from day one? Or how did you phase in what you did yourself versus what you used as a service?
Yeah, so I mean, our story was, the first 3 years of our company, almost 3 years, it was just two of us. So I mean, we really had to figure out anything.
You need a few APIs. There's two of you.
Yeah, I mean, constraints are awesome. You really, I think, the more you automate things away in the early days, like it just compounds over time, right? And so we really were forced, like anything that took any amount of time, we had to write code or whatever. Just we had to find a way to either outsource it or automate it away. So when we started, I mean, I'd read up enough on, like setting up SMTP servers and MTAs, and obviously SendGrid, we'd known about them. I'd used them at previous companies. We said, well, this makes way too much sense. I mean, this kind of solves all the gross problems and allows us the flexibility we want. So yeah, we had a great relationship with them. I mean, from day one even through today. And what we decided, what it turns out is like when you get into messaging, the hard part is not so much actually sending an email. Like that's pretty straightforward. There's like plenty, you could do that yourself if you wanted. The really difficult part is getting it delivered. It's kind of the same way that when you think about with Google, it's like, hey, there's a web spam team. With Facebook or social media, there's like content moderation teams. Well, okay, in a decentralized world with email, or now the same thing as with SMS, there's going to be some sort of spam filtering somewhere, right? And people call it deliverability, but it's all the same problem. And so the thing that we realized was, if you're sending just, so let's say, I don't know, purely like transactional emails or things that, like that's very straightforward deliverability. You never have any issues because everybody opens them, all this kind of stuff. When you get into being proactive, you get into marketing. I mean, the lines between what is spam, what somebody wants, and what somebody doesn't want, start to get gray really fast. And it turns out, I mean, it's a really cool evolution amongst email clients. Gone are the days where it's like, if you use the word Viagra, like that's spam and everything else is like good. Now it's actually very personalized where, hey, you, Jason, you'll stop getting emails if you just stop opening them. And it's the responsibility of the person sending it to figure that out. And if you don't, then you get penalized kind of at large. And so that was something we had to build all on our own. And so that was where we kind of drew the lines. Like, we could use, SendGrid to help us like deliver the mails and kind of like deal with some of the technical details. But at the end of the day, the really hard part was, okay, how do you increase relevance and make sure that from a consumer's point of view, that was really good? And those are systems that, obviously we had data to help, make things more relevant, but we had to figure out like build our own scores and our own systems to figure that out.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you never had to build some of that base level functionality yourself though.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of looked at it as like, I think every entrepreneur, engineer has to figure this stuff out is where you're going to draw the line. Like, what are you going to be really good at? What are you not? And so we always took the stance of, okay, we are going like, we have a much more like, let's build things ourselves or use open source and really understand it. But in cases where we saw an opportunity where, we kind of knew how a service worked, but we just didn't have the time to build it, that was a good opportunity for us to partner up. And especially with companies that we thought were kind of moving fast. I mean, because the other thing is you want to pick a service that
will innovate.
Is right. It's going to keep moving forward, right? So you don't get rate limited by them. Because we certainly, not with SendGrid at all, but like we've had that happen with others where, we got stuck because we kind of needed more things than faster they can move. And then you end up having to build it yourself anyway. So that definitely worked well for email and SMTP.
So let's talk, and then we can fast forward to the future, just about some inflection points. So it takes you a while. You're bootstrapping for a couple of years. We could chat about that or not if you want. You lean into Shopify when you have a buddy that exposes you to the system. Did it take off from there? Did it take off when you got 100 Shopify merchants? And like pre-COVID, what were the inflection points? Then we can talk about COVID.
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting. I kind of divide, the first 3 years of Klaviyo were really, it was our kind of bootstrapping phase, right? I think when we were after about 3 years, we'd gotten to probably around, maybe about 1,000 customers, maybe around $1 million run rate. And
for two of you.
Yeah, it took a long time compared to like how fast people expect to go now. It took a long time.
Yeah.
But we just had this, I guess, I think it's a nice part about bootstrapping is we just had this point of view that it's like, look, we're just going to focus on making sure we really understand our customers, building a product they love, so product market fit, and then we're going to expect that growth will come from there. Like we always felt like, word of mouth, like we did a bunch of content marketing, we did a little bit of SEO, we did a lot of work with, partnerships, Shopify and others. We always felt like the best channel for us would be like when somebody cares about us, we want them to be raving about it. Customers, where there's, we have a fair number of partners that are like marketing, consultants, agencies. We just want them to be raving about us. So we kind of focused in on that. And to be honest, we kept trying to forecast growth, but we didn't really know what good looked like or didn't. So the business kind of kept going. Once we got about 3 years in, we said like, we actually at this point, we're like, all right, so are we going to raise money, or is this just going to be, I hate the term, but like kind of a lifestyle business, or we're just going to kind of grow it as much as the two of us can handle? I think we were both of kind of the opinion that it was cool once we got profitable. It's like, okay, we know we're going to survive. But now, like, let's go for it. I mean, we've got this product we think is pretty good. We have the ability to hire the people that we really want to work with. Like, let's go for it. And so definitely, I don't think we even understood until we were maybe about 500,000, just how great e-commerce and kind of, retail was as a segment. And certainly we were really fortunate to get to meet the folks at Shopify really early days. I mean, I remember we built our first kind of integration into Shopify, and then others, BigCommerce, Magento, and WordPress. We did all that stuff way back in 2012, 2013, and Shopify just like exploded. And all of a sudden, we just realized, boy, we're talking to so many Shopify businesses just every week. And so that was a really fun period because I remember one year we were trying to forecast like what revenue growth would be, and my co-founder and I both had different estimates, and we ended up like blowing away both of them, right?
And what year was this? Sorry.
That was, like maybe 2015. I think it was it. Yeah, I think it was year
just
number
when
4
Shopify was really pulling away from the pack, right? That's what people don't get from the outside. Shopify did not immediately pull away, right? It was quite a ways into its journey when it became this de facto platform.
Yeah, they obviously are well past this point now and got there way before we did. But we're big believers in the kind of in SaaS, there's kind of this, it's instead of like things like kind of aggregating towards the mean, there's this kind of like aversion to the mean. So once you kind of break through and people kind of know who you are, which obviously, we were lucky that we were kind of there when Shopify was doing that, right? And broken through that barrier. You sort of become a little bit of this default. Like you become, I think it's word of mouth. People start to say, oh yeah, I've used that. I know what that is. So that's right. I think we were kind of in the right place at the right time. And with with a very similar kind of product ethos of, okay, let's focus on small businesses and have a really great, really usable product. And things just took off.
And then back when that happened, what was the Shopify ecosystem like? Were you able to like integrate on day one with new merchants, or how do they find you as this sort of smaller but breakout leader? How do they find you as this Shopify partner?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we became, so we did a lot of content marketing around, personalized messaging. And then once we realized that, e-commerce was going to be a bigger thing, we said, okay, we started to focus there. So we said, okay, let's go with this vertical playbook. And we felt like that was good because it would also, at the time, a lot of, marketing messaging, marketing tech was very horizontal. So we felt like there was an advantage to aiming vertical and starting that way. And so it was a combination of things. Like that helped create some of the background noise. But then, one of the things I give, credit to Shopify for big time, they had really built out the kind of all of the plumbing to make a great ecosystem. So it was interesting. Like when we had this database and we said, hey, we're going to build as many connectors as we can to help people get data in. We'll sort of save them the time of having to do the integration. So we built, 40, 50 different, connectors into all sorts of different kinds of systems, CRMs, e-commerce platforms, payment platforms, all this kind of stuff. What was amazing was, relative to others, some people, there was a lot of like artificial red tape. You had to talk to people. They'd like they'd be slow in responding. With Shopify, they had like a great set of APIs. It was all self-serve at that point. There was a bit of a review process, but it was quick. And then they actually, because they were growing, they were happy to help. If they found things and you kind of could show them proof points, they wanted to help you, get distribution. So they were great in terms of just, at the time, whether it was, kind of recommending through their teams or just, they obviously had like kind of a listing page, a directory, just, kind of promoting us there. So that in the early days, that definitely helped a bunch.
And do you have a sense, because when you look at partner ecosystems, and we could flip it around and talk about Klaviyo's partner ecosystem too.
Yeah.
It's almost always a long tail distribution. You could have 1,000 apps on Shopify or Salesforce, but it's probably 10 that get half the installs and then it goes there, right? And back when Shopify took off and you were taking off, do you think you got 20%, 30%? How much of your new business do you think you got directly from Shopify? Do you have a sense back in the day?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, it's probably something like that. Like, to be honest, we weren't as good at measuring it as we probably should have been, or we would be today. But I think that's right. We always felt like, what we wanted to do was, if somebody had kind of the operational side of their business kind of nailed down. So in e-commerce, that meant it's like, hey, you have a website. You have a way to take payments. You have a way to kind of keep all of your, to track orders and inventory and shipping. If you could do all of that, like we wanted to complement that and be the kind of customer side of it. Like, okay, so how do you interface with your customers? What does that experience look like? And, we just felt like that was going to be a super important like complement to any kind of stack. And that, I think it's true in e-commerce and retail. It's true in other areas too. And so in that case, like, we think, it was a mix of folks finding us. Certainly in the early days, a lot of people found out about us through Shopify and through other partnerships we had. And then over the years, I think it slowly migrated where it became this like, okay, we just have this brand around like, okay, if you're doing e-commerce and you're doing, either it's wrangling your customer data or doing customer messaging, we're just kind of a good place to do it. Now I think it's almost like it's so intertwined, it's hard to pull apart. But that's why, I would tell folks, like, if you're building stuff, like, you want to invest in both, right? Certainly, like, the partnerships we built have been fantastic. And at the same time, like, we've built more of our own content and our own kind of like, I don't know, case studies and resources. And if you have those two things together, I think it's the best of both. That's how you can go the fastest.
Yeah, and when just a bit of a perpendicular question on just like the strategy of pricing and economics as you talk, I'm thinking when you have Klaviyo or something like it, where some of your competitors are not only horizontal but pseudo commodities, right? And then you're providing focused value. How do you compare pricing? How do you anchor around sort of known pricing points in the industry?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it was actually something we spent a bunch of time thinking about when we started. So at the time, messaging email was very commoditized.
Yes.
The feeling was, well, email's free, it doesn't cost anything to send. So, there's maybe some infrastructure you need to do it, but it just, whatever. It should become pennies and then, fractions of pennies and all this kind of stuff. What we felt was different was we actually invested a lot in not just adding in like personalization, but also in doing the attribution side of helping you figure out what worked. So I think about it, it was almost like a cost-based model, which is what like email had become. And we wanted to flip it to a value-based model.
Yep.
So if we felt like if we could say, hey, the value of the message you just sent was, I don't know, it was $1, right? Because I don't know, on average, you send it to 100 people and like 20% of them respond to it. And on average, they spent, X dollars. Like, if you could do the math and do the attribution correctly, we felt like you could change the whole calculus. Because at the end of the day, what people were really after was growth. And that was actually that was the big distinguisher or differentiator. Was we felt like a lot of what marketing tech had become was it was basically just to do stuff. But if you ever want to figure out like, well, what's the ROI? Nobody wanted to make that easy. So probably, I think it was year number 2 for us, we invested a bunch in how do we make sure we can handle attribution internally? So you didn't have to use Google Analytics or something, or pay for some other software to do it. And that's actually been really true for today. So if you talk to a lot of our customers, for years I'd get questions like, what's a good open rate? Now those questions are gone. Everybody asks, it's like, hey, what's a good return? What's a good, we talk a lot about like revenue per email sent or per campaign.
Yes.
And people just came obsessed with it. We actually, in our product, we just deleted or kind of hid and de-emphasized all of the classic kind of email metrics, things like open rates, click rates, all that stuff. We just said, hey, you can find it, but it's a couple pages deep. Instead, we just said, hey, here's the dollars that came out of this. And I think people loved that because finally they felt like they had something to say, okay, the reason I spent so many hours, right, building out this campaign or building out this automation is because I can see the results. We also think it helped kind of gamify things. It made it a little more fun when you had something that it's like, hey, every month I'm going to try to drive this number up. And then we found like the cool part was a few years in, we talked to customers and they'd say, yeah, we've now taken those metrics that you show us. Those are now like the KPIs for our business. Like that's how we drive. That's how our whole team operates. If last month, 20% of our revenue came from Klaviyo, the goal for the next 3 months is let's get it to 25.
So you're the dashboard. Awesome. You're the dashboard for the ROI of the company, right?
That's right. Right. Yeah.
So sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say maybe the point that led to a big theme that we figured out a few years in, since 2013, 2014, that we realized a lot of companies looked at their customers as very transactional. It was, I drive traffic, I run ads, I get somebody to show up, they buy, and that's the end of it. They didn't realize, the value of either pre-purchase or post-purchase, that relationship. And so all of a sudden we said, it's like, hey, you can drive this yourself. And by the way, Klaviyo is a lot more cost-effective, much better ROI than any advertising you're ever going to do. And so that's where, we started getting around this idea of, hey, instead of like paid advertising or paid marketing, what if we got into like owned marketing, kind of at the idea of like owned media. And so we said, okay, what percentage of your revenue is being driven from owned channels, right? So that's where we think about things that are direct, email, your website, text messaging, all these kinds of bits. And now our obsession is like, how do we drive that percentage up and up and up to try to give more of those businesses more control, more ball control, where in the past they felt like, if I don't have somebody else kind of driving traffic to me, if that ever shuts off, I'm kind of dead to rights. Now they feel like they're building a community, a brand, an ecosystem unto themselves.
And does that push you a little bit more up market so you can have those more mature conversations, or can you stay close to your SMB roots and do that?
So it's interesting. Like people used to feel like that was only a thing that big enterprise customers cared about because they had scale. But we very strongly believe, and the good news is I think all of our partners do too, it's really something you should be doing from day one. I mean, once you have one customer, that's somebody that can start talking about you and your products.
Yes.
And so I think a thing we've realized with a lot of businesses is they said, we want to get started early on. It just, nobody's giving us a playbook. It's so hard to do. Running an ad campaign on Google or Facebook or selling on Amazon is so straightforward. If we can't match the user experience of that, nobody's going to, entrepreneurs, when they're starting out, they don't have the time. So we felt like if we could match that, more people could start from day one, and actually it would make it easier for them to, there's no reason why they can't be driving a lot of their sales, from either repeat customers or helping convert more customers from day one, which just makes the whole business more likely to succeed.
Yep. And does, and just because it's a fun topic, as pricing based ultimately around the lift you give, right, is the magic in e-commerce marketing, right? It's the magic, right? You can either send a trillion emails, but what you really want is a lift, right? And even modest changes can have dramatic, if anyone sold anything, the effects are dramatic, right? But if you're pricing that way, did it slow down sales because you had to talk through it more rather than a hyper transactional model? And how did you, with SMBs, how did you weigh that trade-off of having to educate folks more in the buying process?
Yeah, it's a good question. So this is one where we just used the heuristic. So I didn't finish answering your question about pricing. So we want to switch from this like cost-based to value-based model.
Yeah.
And so what we decided was, we wanted to be viewed as, more advanced, really more of a premium product. It wasn't necessarily that we were more advanced or we had more bells and whistles. We just wanted to feel like we would get you the return that you were looking for. We were for serious companies that really want to grow. So we actually just came up with this heuristic that was, hey, we're going to take we looked at this, we kind of looked at the pricing models of everybody else who was out there and said, hey, we're just going to charge, 50% more, 100% more. And we just made that our model. And we felt like that kind of put us in this like premium spot.
It's worth more. So, you're providing more value, right? So you're anchoring high. You're anchoring high.
What we found is it was hard to get people to wrap their, everybody loved the attribution, but it's always hard to to be convinced. It's like, well, is that exactly the right way to do people want to pay based on what they see, and what if the math changes and all this kind of stuff. So we decided it's like we still would do it. Our pricing model is still today is based on effectively the number of customers you have, and how frequently and potentially how frequently you message them. But what we wanted to measure internally is we looked for every single business we worked with. What was their ROI? And we had kind of targets of, hey, we want it to be at least 10x, at least 20x. And so we target that. And so in a way that's like, right. So rather than have like kind of a pure take rate or something like that, you pay us some percentage, like, payment processing is a really easy one, right? Where you can just do that. It's clear value add. It makes a lot of sense. In our case, because we were one step removed, like, you know what, we'll measure that and we'll make sure that we kind of tune it so it's in the right ballpark. It's never too expensive. But we felt like that gave us a lot. Like we felt comfortable knowing when we talked to customers, hey, we can afford to charge a little bit more because we can draw a pretty straight line between the activities they're doing inside of Klaviyo and then actual growth.
Yeah. And are you usually at this point, we're all veterans, have they used other products before and then they're seeing that Klaviyo can give them more? Is that the typical flow in today's world?
It depends. I think that's, probably the bulk of our customers fit in that bucket of they're aware of, they're obviously aware of email. They've used it for their business in some way, but they looked at, doing automated email just felt so unapproachable. It's like, there's so much data work to be done. And then, how do you do the logic and can you do content? How does all that stuff work? And we just made that easy. There are definitely, as we've grown, an increasing number of businesses have come to us kind of from day one. And it's a really interesting group because in that case, everybody obviously knows what email is, but they're not used to, like, how do I get going from the start, right? So in that case, it's been more fun because we've set ourselves a goal of, okay, in an hour, how do we make it possible for somebody that's starting from zero knowledge to be not just, know enough, but have set everything up where we can get them their first customer off an email or text message based on whatever just content design they can do in 1 hour.
Yeah.
And that's been really cool because when people see that kind of like that eureka moment of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just made a sale. Really good things happen. One, they start talking about us like crazy, but also two, they're hooked, right? They're gonna be looking for that second, that 10th, that 100th. And now they think is, okay, this is part of how I'm gonna grow.
Yeah, there's like a related question I was thinking about. Just we're coming out of COVID, right? So now there's this new world, this post-COVID world. Like e-commerce, obviously, we don't have to talk about it, exploded during COVID, right? But why was Klaviyo a huge beneficiary? And the reason I asked the question is I'm assuming a lot of your customers, look, everyone knows that come March everyone went online, like every store had to go online. But some customers already were online. It's not the same. And I assume a lot of your customers were second generation users. They'd already used marketing products. So why did Klaviyo get a huge benefit, right? Because weren't folks already using other products beforehand?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are kind of two classes of folks. There were, more digital natives.
Yes.
And certainly that probably correlates with younger, like, just, businesses and brands that have started more recently. And then secondly, so we saw a big, uptick in last year is businesses that were maybe originally brick and mortar businesses that had always been thinking about moving online, but just didn't have a reason to pull the trigger, or it was on their list, but all of a sudden it became imperative, right? So we kind of think there are two big trends that happened last year. The first is like, where does the transaction take place? And obviously that shifted from being in a physical store to online. And there's all the things around there. Okay, logistics, shipping, all things that make that complicated.
And do they need Klaviyo the next day? Is it a first purchase? Like there's like a couple apps you got to buy to go online. Is Klaviyo one of those? And there's others you phase in later, right?
Yeah, right. So I mean, we definitely feel that like, if you're you need to know your customers and start building relationships with them from day one. Sure. I mean, you can wait till later, but you're wasting time. So that was trend number one. The other trend that Klaviyo really plays into is not so much for the transaction, because Klaviyo's not, we don't take the actual order or process the payment. So we don't actually care where that happens. What was interesting to us is we felt like what online adoption was accelerating was the kind of the identification or the de-anonymization of who the consumer is. So the analogy we made is like, if you walk into, say a big box retailer, whether it's your first time in there or your 100th time, nobody has any idea. It's an entirely anonymous transactional kind of experience, which may be what you want, but it does mean that it's like there's no opportunities to contextualize or know who you are or do any kind of personalization, which can be sometimes frustrating. The cool part about online is now, because we have this kind of, whether it's an email address or a phone number or some basic information, now all of a sudden, like if you want, there's the opportunity for that business to actually contextualize your, like, when you visit your website, any messaging you get. And so we felt like the kind of a single online transaction kind of catalyzes that whole relationship, because now you know each other. And obviously it's on the business to make that useful. If it's just spam and it's not interesting, like, well, that's fine. Like everybody's just going to unsubscribe or block it.
Yes.
But it gave you an opportunity to do that. And so now we think about like post-COVID, the big thing was now we have all these businesses that whether they're entirely digitally natives or there's some sort of hybrid, they now have the opportunity to go actually know more about their customers, and they're finding ways to stitch that together into the physical experience as well as the digital experience. So we have people sending emails where, sure, a lot of it is happening where the transaction is happening online. It's also a lot where the call to action is like, hey, come visit us in store. And by the way, because we know who you are, or you've told us something about yourself, we can kind of point you to the right place.
Yeah.
And so especially for, larger, more mature brands, I think that's really interesting. So this whole de-anonymizing who the consumer is, making it so that consumers, if they want to be known by that business, they can start to build that direct relationship. We think that's a really big trend. And that definitely really took off last year.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's just, for other founders and let's talk about platforms. Let's first talk about the platforms you build on, and then let's talk about you as a platform, because it's a fun topic. The first one, you talked about how you exploded with Shopify, right? I feel like there's a paradox for founders today, right? Which is you want diversification. You want to be, in an ideal world, you'd be on Shopify, you'd be on WooCommerce, you'd be on Magento, you'd be on BigCommerce, you'd be on whatever just launched out of YC or on TechCrunch, right? Mm-hmm. But Shopify's market share has grown, right? And so I see more and more folks who, no matter what they say, it makes sense to just bet on Shopify, right? And so what have you learned? You've diversified, right? You're on all the platforms, but what are the learnings behind the learnings on where these different platforms are going?
Yeah. So maybe a couple things. The first is, I think you definitely want to build. I think it's a good idea to build, your underlying tech so that it's kind of agnostic, right? So there's a level of indirection in between what you solve for and the other folks that today and tomorrow can solve that. They can integrate with you or help solve the problem. So in our case, the issue was we built this database. It was great at storing customer data and helping you use it, but we had to find some way to get it in. And so what that meant was we had to build basically a separate layer that made it easy to connect to all the different, and our bet was, whether it was SaaS or open source, people were going to choose sort of, rather than build themselves, they were going to start to choose from a handful of platforms.
Yes.
So I would definitely recommend doing that. Like it's kind of worth the extra investment. Now, the counterpoint to that is, I mean, certainly like you talked about like power laws, like there are going to be businesses that just, win because they build the best products, they build the best technology. And certainly Shopify has been one of those. And so we knew that was going to be the case. And that was part of the, honestly, was part of the calculus was, hey, there's, even if there's not going to be, there may be, 100 different, let's say, e-commerce platforms. But the reality is there's probably going to be 5 or 10 that most will standardize on, and the top 1 or 2 are probably going to have huge market share just because people don't want to have to make endless numbers of decisions. So what we tried to do was we went to every single, partner of ours. And so we could start with the e-commerce ones and basically looked at like who was forward thinking, wanted to invest in building relationships with other, soon to be, hopefully like us, platforms out there. And the cool part was, like I said, Shopify and a few others, they made it so easy to get started.
So easy.
And we could just tell that a lot of the ethos was similar. So I think like you kind of, I look, good partnerships, it's kind of like pulling on a string, right? If both sides aren't pulling, it very easy, it's like kind of, it doesn't stay tight anymore. So we always looked for partners that, kind of were as equally as invested as we were. And if they weren't, that was okay. We just knew it's like, there probably wasn't going to bear a lot of fruit. So in this case, like it was definitely like, nope, everybody's working in the same direction, or like, helping keep that string tight. That really took off. And I give Shopify a lot of credit for, I think we're early to this game of realizing developers and building an ecosystem mattered. I think a lot of folks have now tried to rinse and repeat their playbook. And that probably gets to like how we think about it. As we've grown, like I remember when we started and we realized there were developers coming to us saying, hey, can we integrate with Klaviyo, and whether it's to pull data out so we can personalize the experiences we're powering, or we want to help push more data in so people can use that for marketing messaging. We looked at companies like Shopify, like Twilio, like Salesforce as examples of companies that had done this really well and understood developers. And I think it's still early days for us, but those were companies where like, hey, how do we replicate the kind of magic they've built, where people say it's the best, it's the most efficient way for somebody else to build their own business. Yes. Right? Integrated with us. And we're not the only company that has APIs into a database to do analytics or to do marketing messaging. But if we're the easiest to integrate with, any small startup, they're going to put their time on what's likely to, where there's kind of the greatest mass, but it's also the easiest to do.
And if they can get it out.
Yeah.
There can be a temptation as you become a system of record to make it easier to deposit data inside than to remove at least the structured form of the data, right?
Yeah, I hope that's, a trend that, something that we also believed in, when we were building, effectively B2B software was, in the consumer world, there's this kind of, it's becoming less implicit now, but there's this kind of, this deal that, hey, you could use the platform, but the data was never yours. Yes. So, you take a picture and you put it on Facebook, like it's not really your data anymore. I always felt like with B2B software, it's like, for a business, it's gonna be so important that you get that data interoperability. So we've really tried to partner up with companies that had the same belief, that felt like, okay, what matters is data portability matters. And the best part about APIs is that you can edit the data and you can pull it out for other use cases. The interesting part is, how do you do a really good job of making sure that the people you're working with care about, let's say, privacy and security to the same extent that you do? That's a really fascinating, I think, trend that's happened in the last couple of years that we're really very focused on. But at the end of the day, we look at ourselves as we're just an extension of, hopefully a business could build what we're building. It just would take them a while. So, hey, if we can help, thousands, hopefully millions of small businesses, not have to pay that cost, all the better.
Yeah, and let's talk about just for 1 second, because another topic is super interesting, I think, and I may be misdescribing it for Klaviyo, but it's co-opetition. So as you scaled, and this is natural, Shopify adds some low-end functionality, right, around email marketing for sure, right, to its whole base. Salesforce Commerce Cloud has always had more enterprise functionality, going back to ExactTarget and others. I've found that typically that benefits folks like Klaviyo, because worst case, the customer outgrows some of that solution and they become a lead. Like they start to generate leads for you that you might not otherwise get, even if on day one, it's a little stressful to have a little more competition. What were your learnings on that sort of co-opetition?
Yeah, totally. Well, first of all, I think it's probably generally true that, it's sort of like, any press is good press. So the more people are thinking about this is like, it's something that matters, yes. Definitely helps. In the case of the folks we work with, we've always just had very kind of upfront conversations that, hey, if you want to build what we built, then like, just let us know. I mean, the world is big enough. Like, we believe the technology we're building is like, I mean, it applies to so many different industries, different verticals. Like, there's a lot of ways we can direct ourselves. So there's no point to be, kind of enemies here. Like, we can, let's be friends. And if it doesn't make sense, just let us know. The other part is like, yeah, I mean, because of this like openness of, at least B2B software, I'm just a big believer. It's like, if you build the best product, like consumers are going to kind of demand, or customers are going to demand getting to interoperate with it. And so
Yes.
sometimes I think competition is great because it's kind of boring if we just, if you end up in these kind of walled gardens, and we talk about this even inside of Klaviyo, like if we can't build the best feature or the best use for, we can't solve for some use case in the best way, then we're just going to interact. We're going to, integrate with whoever is the best. And that's frankly makes things more fun, right? I mean, we talk about for our product teams, our engineering teams, we're more interested in building like whatever the best possible experience is, rather than the ones that we know that customers will buy because it's, comes bundled with Klaviyo or whatever. So I think it's just a more fun way to work. I mean, especially when my co-founder and I, when we got into Klaviyo, we weren't doing so much to, build a big business as we just wanted to build some of the technology that we wished existed. And so I tell, all the engineers that work at Klaviyo the same thing. It's like, look, if you're here, just to kind of build competitive moats, that's just not that exciting. It's way more interesting. And I think for folks like you and I that care about technology, just want to see as much technology in our lifetimes as we can. So let's keep, the more we can actually encourage competition, the better.
Yes.
And certainly when you get to co-opetition, it's great because, people will do things, you'll learn from them, kind of some cool user experience or some way to do something that's kind of helps us leap forward. I mean, we've seen that with Klaviyo where, in the early days, there was a lot we, kind of borrowed from others, right? Stole that we thought were great ideas. And we don't get upset when people see, ideas or paradigms that we've introduced and they want to use them. We think that's awesome, right? That's all. And we're excited when people kind of enter and want to kind of help level us up too.
And how many employees do you have today?
Gosh, I think we're up
600?
to maybe 600, 700. It's a little weird working remote, right? Because I get to meet everybody, over Zoom, and it's that's kind of fun. But when you're like, we used to do these big all hands every Friday, and so you kind of got a sense for how big we were, at least in our main office in Boston. But now it's a little tough. You just get the you get the little Zoom ticker, right, of how many people are in a room.
Yeah, the funny thing is, I want to talk about your platform next before we run out of time, but people forget as you're growing, co-opetition is great. I think it's a winner. It makes you better, right? It makes you more open. And then we forget a moment, you'll have 1,000 employees soon enough, right? No one will have 1,000 employees, no partner working on your problem, right?
Yeah.
This is what you start. It's fascinating. Like you have this scale and no one can catch you, right? The amount of man hours and engineering hours you're looking to solving this problem. By the end of this year, no one there are other folks in the broad category, but no one will be spending as many smart hours as you are solving your customer problems. And that lasts for decades, right? That lasts for decades. And we forget you're still a startup in some ways, but in your segment, you may have more people working on a distinct set of problems than anyone on planet Earth, even today, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the challenge, culturally is, especially as you grow, is how do you make sure every person, every Klaviyo for us, every team feels like a startup within this like constellation of that is this larger company. Everybody talks about that. And I think there's a lot of companies that have done a great job of really so what are the organizational structures that allow you to do that? We really think about it that way. If you, in some sense, if it feels like we've kind of won or we've solved the problem, it's not very interesting. We're all going to get bored and, I would just quit and let's go work on something different. So what makes it fun is when you feel like you're on a really small team. And for us, it's really small. We try to keep teams 2, 3, 4, 5 people. And you're just this David versus Goliath. You're trying to solve this massive problem that there's whole companies out there that are trying to solve. And it's your job to be creative and figure out how to embrace those constraints. And the cool part is you're working in this constellation of all these other teams that are doing other bits. And we know that when you combine them all together, it's better. That's, I think, what makes things fun.
Yes.
So we try to keep it that way. Certainly yes, it's true. We're focusing more than others, but the more that just feels small, feels tight, it feels a little impossible. That's a fun way to work.
All right, just 2 things I want to hit before we run out of time, but let's just briefly or not talk about you as a platform. So now it's flipping around, right? Are there a few partners that are making millions and millions of dollars off you, right? And how are you nurturing your own ecosystem? Are you there yet? Do you have a big team? What are you thinking about to nurture your ecosystem?
Okay, it's a great question. So we are, this is a big focus for us this year. So,
yeah,
well, I wish I had the exact names and numbers. I know there are companies that, and none of this is, are doing, like, these are great engineers, developers, product folks doing it themselves, that, yeah, certainly have built, companies and applications around Klaviyo that are, that have, hundreds and thousands of customers that are doing really well. One of the things I think, honestly, we've not done a great job is being there for those, those companies, really, those entrepreneurs as they're growing up and building, whether it's specific to Klaviyo or just like adjacent to us.
Yeah.
So we're really putting a lot into that this year. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we think about Klaviyo, if done right, we should be providing, go back to day one, we should be providing this database that makes it like really easy. I mean, we think about it as like a brain for your business. It just allows you to treat people the way you want to treat them, but just at massive scale. And so, well, what would you do with that brain and how should it act? Well, there are so many different customer experiences, all different types of media, all different types of use cases, different industries. There's no way we can possibly get to all of those. And so if we can end up being the way that you store all that data and then use it, federate it out, that's really powerful. And so we think there's existing technology platforms that can leverage what we're doing. We also think there's a whole bunch of technology, companies or platforms that don't exist yet that can help build around us. So our big goals for this year is how do we make sure we've kind of opened up, I don't think anybody's ever done this, give you all of the APIs into our customer database. So it's a little bit like a SQL database, but just really designed for kind of customer, event data, activity data, all of our marketing messaging bits, and then say, go nuts. And so we know we're working with a bunch of, startups now, or some larger platforms on those APIs, designing those. And then, we really want to see, it's like, can we help hundreds, thousands of other, developers go off and build like self-sustaining businesses that help in all sorts, both within retailing and outside, help end businesses or end consumers, do more with their data. So it's very early for us there, but I think that's why I really admire, a bunch of the companies you talked about that are true, like API-driven, tech-driven platforms. I think it's just how you go the furthest and the fastest. So this should be the year, hopefully, that we start to have that inflection and start to take off. So hopefully it's maybe for us, we think about those platforms, they got there much earlier, but for us, 2021 is going to be the year that we finally take off.
Got it. It's interesting timing. Okay, last with our couple minutes, because I know I'm curious and other people, can we just talk a little bit about how sales works at the company, right, and marketing? So are you, I should know, how much is self-serve versus sales, and how does that just kind of the nuts and bolts work of how you're selling the product?
Yeah, it's great. So, for us, we're, I don't know if we're unique, but we have a very wide distribution.
Very wide.
So we have, you can think of big iconic brands, right, that are, have a very high touch, sales motion where they're trying to figure out, like, they're going to rip and replace their database technology along with a whole bunch of markets. We're a real revenue driver, and it could be hundreds of millions or billions of dollars for them. So you have those kinds of customers. Then we have the, entrepreneurs who are starting something on the weekends where they need to start for free. So our price model starts out as freemium. We've always felt strongly about that. We think it like holds us honest, like on our products, and really like forces us to let the product lead.
For sure.
And so with that, we've got a big chunk of our customers. Definitely the majority of our customers come into us all self-serve. So they figure out how to use our product all on their own. And again, we just think that it's a good kind of baseline that we are always trying to how do we raise that bar, that you can do more without feeling like you have to wait for us to be around, right? At the same time, I remember when we, first built out our, sales team, our first couple of, reps, we said, it's like, look, we want this to be a very consultative process. We want you to know our product cold, understand our customers cold. And so, yeah, I think then we have different, like, kind of, to match up to customers where they want to be met. We have folks that are for smaller businesses. Typically for them, they kind of know what they want to do. They have a couple of ideas. How do we help them, show some value, like, upfront, right? So our sales team will, this is not normal, but like, they'll actually get into the product, help people set up a few, whether it's a few emails, a few automated workflows, get them to show them some ROI all before we ever ask them to, swipe a credit card. And so we'll do that
of any size. You don't care what size the customer. You have the manpower to cover the smaller customers there.
No, well, that's what I mean. Our product does most of the lifting for us.
Yes.
You know, on the small side. You know, usually it's like when a business is doing. We think about small businesses as a business that's maybe getting close to $1 million a year, like in retail. Like that's usually a good time where it's a bit of a bigger move for them, so they kind of want
Yes.
to prove things out. But yeah, we've always looked at it as like, I mean, how do we go faster, right? How do we keep things really high velocity? So we're constantly thinking about like, how do we take the best learnings from our sales team, our marketing team, our customer success team that are, in a lot of cases, we talk about them as trailblazers. They're figuring out the patterns, and then how are we building that back into our product, either so that people can figure things out on their own, or it just makes us faster. And I think that makes things fun, kind of keeps things fresh rather than feeling like you're kind of retreading the same problems over and over again.
Got it.
Yeah.
So the sales team is mostly observing customers, jumping in to help them, right? And then, you know, in theory, driving more revenue from the largest folks, the folks paying a couple $1,000 a month. Is there a line in terms of sort of ACV or deal size where you draw the line for sales at the end of the day?
I think it's a couple. I mean, so I think it's a couple $100 a month is roughly where we draw the line of where it's self-serve versus you'll talk to somebody in sales. But we try to be very, we think a lot about like, how do we work from the customer backwards? So be customer first. I think one of the challenges is it's very easy to set up a sales org that kind of meets the way that you want the world to look.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, you have customers from all over the place. I mean, it's not unusual for us to have some huge brands come in and say, hey, look, I'm only willing to spend a few $100s with you today, but that's kind of because I want a proof of concept and really grow this out. And we would hate for some like simple heuristic, right, in a form or something that they did inside the product to block that out. And sometimes, I mean, the cool part about, you know, let's say retail and direct to consumer is the businesses grow so fast. Like you can't just look at somebody's email address and know, oh, that's a huge company or not. I mean, some of these companies grow so quickly. The other thing we have to do is really stay on top of who are the companies that who have that really high trajectory, and how do we make sure that we're sticking with them? So that's where it almost like, you know, between our sales team and our customer success team, you just really have to match up and kind of watch. Because I mean, some companies are kind of slow growers or lower growers. Some of them just grow really quickly, and we have to kind of tease all that out.
Yeah, it's funny when I remember the first time I ever bought a seat of Salesforce, one seat. I had a rep, he called me. And I said, Chris, bless your soul, you can't afford to talk to me. He's like, no, we think you might grow bigger. He's like, it's okay. And that Salesforce, I don't know if Salesforce does that today when the big deals are nine figures, but it shocked my mind in 2006 when an AE in San Francisco, I blow my mind. I never had that experience in software before, right? But it was smart. Yeah. That was a good early investment by Benioff, right?
Totally. I mean, it's all about, I mean, like this goes back to the thesis of Klaviyo, which is like, how do you do personalization at scale, right? And so obviously if they can, that experience, I mean, obviously it was, you know, meant a lot. I mean, you still remember that. If finding a way to deliver that, like, I mean, obviously that's what we're doing internally is a little bit of dogfighting around stuff, is how do we make sure we can do that, right? Make it as efficient as possible to still get that kind of magic. Yeah.
All right, one last question. I know we're out of time, but just to finish up on sales and marketing, and maybe the answer is no, but are partners and channels a big part of your revenue mix? They're a huge part of HubSpot, right? Other folks like Gorgeous that I know get a huge amount through agencies and partners. What have you learned there, if anything?
Definitely. Yeah. So the short answer is yes.
Yeah.
You know, I think so why is that? I mean, certainly Klaviyo is because we interoperate with so many other systems, that drives a lot of partnerships. But then a lot of people, when it comes to this category we call marketing, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of folks not understanding or not sure. They don't have the expertise yet about like, what's the right tech stack? There's so many options out there. And what are the right strategy? And one of the fun parts about marketing and messaging is it's so creative. There's so many different ways to grow.
Yes.
And so a lot of people are looking for what those playbooks are. And especially when you're small, like, you may not have, sometimes we find a lot of entrepreneurs that just don't have that expertise yet. They're the product person. They just haven't figured out that side of it yet. So yeah, I mean, from many, many years ago, we found that like marketing agencies, folks who were helping on the development side, system integrators, or great fit. I think the key thing for us was you have to, a lot of people will be kind of interested, but you have to do a little bit of the work for them of helping them figure out, especially let's say somebody that's selling services, what are the services they're going to sell and how you can help them package those up. One of the things I think is pretty cool about what we've been able to do is we put together a program where we've actually taken a lot of like traditionally like SEO or SEM or advertising agencies and said, hey, look, those are all paid strategies. We think owned strategies, email and SMS are really interesting too. We've helped them define kind of a way to set up, the different kinds of packages that are valuable to them because it helps them, set up the kinds of engagements they want, but they also prove a lot of ROI for their, for the end customers. So it's a way for us to basically help people adopt our things faster. That's been awesome. So I think you do have to invest some time to basically, I think, set up that playbook. And the other thing too is you have to hold the line on, this is the playbook that we care about. Like in some sense, if you're not, if you don't believe in what we believe in, for instance, with email, we've definitely worked with some folks that, still felt like, gosh, the best way to do email is just to send to everybody all the time, which obviously doesn't work anymore. Helping people, coach people up on what the right way to do things are. We found some people were kind of willing to be those quick learners, and those created, once you kind of had a handful of folks that could show that you could build a business, around Klaviyo, service business, obviously lots of other folks came to us and said, hey, how do we get involved in this? And that's been awesome.
Yeah. And you have a big partner enablement team that kind of works with those folks. Is it, you have a layer on top of that, or is that still early, like the platform?
Yeah, we're very, I think, efficient and scalable in how we do it. But we've had that team for, a team working with partners, working with agencies, again, on this exact kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
How to think about the services you want to provide, how you're going to price and package them. I think if you decide you want to go down that route, and I think it's definitely a really good one, I think you can't invest early enough in that. The sooner you do that, you'll get more scale, it'll go faster.
Yeah. Andrew, this was incredible. Thanks for spending all the time with us. And let us know if we can help. And we'd love to have you on stage at SaaStr Annual 1 year, whenever you want to come out, as we're reemerging from COVID. We'd love to have you. But thanks for all this time. This was great.
Awesome. We'll do it. Thanks.